Freedom from fear. For the other side of fear is freedom. Dear friends, we do not see each other, we do not hear each other, and yet, on another level, we know each other. Not, as they say, in the flesh, but we recognize in each other a search for answers. Answers to essential questions like, what gives my life value? How can I make a difference in the world? Why am I living anyhow? What is this discord within me between the good I want to do and the disagreeable elements in my character that hinder this? This is a recorded talk because many of us are asked to stay away from groups of people because of the coronavirus. And if we can't meet outside, let's meet inside. Many of us are worried and even fearful where and who and how it will strike. But not only that, but many thoughtful, or maybe I should say soulful people are also worried about other disorders, like the climate aberrations, the environmental pollution, the drifting immigrants, the power games of the politicians, etc., etc. So, the subject of this talk clearly presented itself: anxiety, worry, and fear. On the one hand, they can clearly influence our life and well-being and can be a major barrier to live a spiritual life. On the other hand, there are ways to deal with it, go beyond it, and reach the inner freedom for which it is a barrier. So, let us investigate what fear is, what it does, and maybe bring it to another level. When we observe ourselves, we notice how we tend to push away unpleasant thoughts, delay important decisions, postpone difficult conversations, and avoid angry disputes. Let us be honest and admit how we avoid discomfort and take refuge in comforting distractions. It is necessary to be honest here. Honest self-observation is the beginning of a transformation of self. And it could well be that because of this stay-at-home situation, we finally have an opportunity to go inside instead of rushing off for our outside goals. If we reflect on it, anxiety, worry, fear is a condition that can have a great impact on our lives. So let us analyze how this, you could say, mood disorder works and where it comes from. And more especially, how we can remove this obstacle on our path through life. We shall look at this phenomenon primarily from the point of view of the spiritually focused person, and by extension, a student on the path to freedom. To start with, we have two moods which are closely connected, namely feelings and emotions. With regard to feelings, no fewer than 127 have, as we speak, been defined in the psychology of the Western world. We have more or less control over our feelings because we have the possibility to strengthen or weaken a feeling to some extent. For example, we are curious, optimistic, nervous, discouraged, happy. We can also have different feelings at the same time. For example, we can be both curious and tense about something new. This is quite different for emotions. They are fewer in number and much more intense, like when we are mad, disgusted, euphoric, devastated, bitter. And the most important aspect of emotions is we can only have one of them at a time, and we have little or no control over it. In short, we have feelings, but emotions have us. And when we talk about fear, it is clear that it is an emotion rather than a feeling, and something that can completely dominate us at times. Emotion comes from the Latin e movere, meaning in movement. And scientists have found that emotions are not so much related to our ordinary feeling system, but to the limbic or automatic system in the brain that ruled our basic instincts already in prehistoric times. Exploring the subject further, there are two types of the emotion fear. First, there is the very useful fear for survival that makes us flee when a snarling dog erupts from the bushes. At that moment it is a very useful emotion, and so it is no wonder that it was developed early in human development, when in primeval times instead of a dog a saber-toothed tiger could rush out of the bushes. And there is secondly the anxiety, worry and fear of all those aspects in life that threaten not to go the way we want them to. That, you might say, is also a kind of survival fear, but rather of the ego in its continuous, convulsive battle with this world and other humans. It is clear that it is this second category of fear that can be a considerable obstacle to a spiritually focused person, because it closes him off and causes cramp, and thereby brings about the opposite of the openness and flow that are necessary for going the path to inner freedom. Anxiety, worry and fear have become such part of our daily lives that we no longer even notice how often we are subject to them. It would be an interesting exercise to write them down during the day, like, oh boy, I hope I'm in time. Oh, what will they think of me? Oh my God, I hope they will be careful. Oh shucks, how do I get out of this? Oh no, not a traffic jam at this time. Well, if we take a closer look at the subject, the question must arise, what is fear actually? A few explorations. Fear is a disorder of the ego, of the earth-centered personality, which finds itself in a world in which people deep down know that nothing is permanent, that everything in the world is finite, nature, civilizations, yes, we ourselves. There is no certainty, no permanency, not in the world and not in our own lives. And from this often subconscious knowing arises our inner feeling of unrest, of being threatened, and our continuous uncertainty about the future. An uncertainty in the sense of, am I doing the right things? Are other people not happier or better? And how will it go tomorrow? Will there be enough for me to be able to live well the way I want? And when will the coronavirus reach me and render me helpless? From these emotions and thoughts stem our continuous effort to create at least a partial degree of certainty in the form of pension schemes, annuities, insurances, an increase in material possessions, and certainly territorial protection and, if possible, expansion. But apart from this material translation of fear into security, This will at the same time also create separation with others who want the same thing. With all those people who pose a threat to my property, my territory, my views, my happiness. And from that separation, a continuous struggle arises, either openly or very subtle, always driven by the ego-built concept of how the others should be, act, how they should cooperate, behave, to make my world satisfactory and safe. And strange as this may sound, these struggles feed our ego. The ego receives meaning from it and a reason for its existence. It becomes important because of our focus on problems. And no wonder that we continue to be busy with thoughts and feelings about some actual negative situation that we cannot yet eliminate. Isn't that rather strange that you are plagued by thoughts that you do not want but cannot turn off? It is also logical that fear becomes the reason to install all kinds of dogmas and doctrines, rules to regulate life. And then dialogue is no longer possible because strong convictions are derived from these artificially created certainties, in the sense of this is how it is for me and how it should be seen and done, not only for me but for you too. And this also has a bearing on the spiritual path. For a pupil on the path must not cling to the teachings he receives. After all, the teaching and the path shift as the pupil progresses. The assignment is ultimately to become the teaching itself. Or, as Jan van Rijkenborg, one of the founders of the School of the Golden Rosycross, stated, everyone must solve his or her assignments on the path in the order and in the time that are right for him or for her. There is, however, when going the path, a deeper layer of fear which goes beyond the fight against external threats. It is the existential fear of the ego not to be important in the human system. A hurdle that has to be addressed when a spiritual apprentice surrenders to what the ego sees as the great void, which is the great spiritual space for which the soul, on the other hand, is all and everything, and which is filled with divine love and cosmic energy. And this primordial fear causes the ego to resist, hand, tooth, and mind, to what it sees as a ridiculous, highly uncertain surrender to something that you cannot beforehand fathom, investigate, and evaluate. Oh, yes, our ego will say, they say that this path is beautiful and uplifting for your soul, but they fail to show it and give me some experience of it. To me, seeing is believing. And in this regard, fear is indeed a poor counselor on the path, as the saying goes. Anxious thinking does not change the imperfections of the past and does not solve the problems of the future. The only thing that fear does is to paralyze us in the here and now. But fear also makes people aware that they have a choice, that they must make a choice. And the poet and writer Khalil Gibran put it beautifully when he wrote, "It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has travelled from the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear, because that's where the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. The question then is, how do we as spiritually interested persons deal with anxiety, worries and fear? What choices do we have? What direction should we follow? Well, if you wish to understand fear, you must at least be able to distance yourself somewhat from it, because only then can you view the phenomenon from all sides. The better to understand it and make the right choice for you in this moment. And we can create that distance for a moment by some directives from Jan van Rijkenborg when he writes, there must first be a general cleansing and realignment of the electromagnetic vibration in the microcosmic sphere that we are. Thoughts and feelings concerning uncertain or unfair situations in our life constantly arise and influence us. And these give rise again to all these awkward actions we undertake. And some people desperately fight against these tendencies, but they must obey them. Its deepest ground is to be found in the electromagnetic field of our microcosm, of the energy system that we are, and hence its influence on our brain system. And there is only one solution for this continuous conflict style of living: the development of new vibrations, of new energies in the astral vibration system of the microcosm that we are. And you may achieve this through three essential developments: by a steadfast belief in your spiritual destiny, by an intense yearning for a different way of life, and by constantly striving to practice it in daily life. If that succeeds, you will no longer inhale the fear and the venom, but take in what serves for your peace and health. Then your spiritual breathing changes. End of quote. Well, it is remarkable that Van Rijkenborg does not ask us to fight against all the tension and fears that manifest themselves in us, but places the solution on a higher level. Fighting against those fears is a pointless matter, as we have seen before, for what you resist persists, and where attention goes, energy flows, negatively and positively. As long as we are identified with our mind, then the ego, who runs our mind, runs our life. The feeling of fear is actually the emotional reaction to the thoughts in our mind. But do we really want to live a life controlled by the mind, controlled by the ego? Surely not. So we may now pose the question, how do I get beyond fear? Where can I find a liberation from worry, fear, anxiety? Well, Einstein once said concisely that you cannot solve a problem at the level on which it was created. In other words, the solution must come from a different level. Let me give some pointers for this other level. First of all, it is clear that we can only let go of something when we hold it. And this also applies to our unrest, worry, fear. This may sound contradictory, but we mean hold in the sense of accepting that it is an issue in us and that we are subjected to these thoughts and feelings. Accept that our ego is often in an energy-draining state of anxiety. Accepting in the sense of not denying our worries and fears, nor condemning them, nor fighting against it, nor running away from them. Accept them and view them with compassion and gentleness. Mindfulness is an attitude which does not force things, but flows from an inner state. Fear, worry, anxiety, and uncertainty arise from the ego, with the mind, our thinking, as its instrument. Again, fear is ultimately the product of our thinking. So, it is essential for a spiritually oriented person to dissociate from his thoughts, his mind. Your true self is not in your head. It is located in a deeper and truer place within you, in your heart. It is astonishing to experience how the negative energy which your fearful thoughts generate is completely nullified by directing that energy to your heart, to focus on your heart. Thus, the solution lies, as Einstein and van Rijkenburg saw clearly, in a different area, the realm of the soul, with the heart as its instrument. Anxiety is a form of lower energy, a vibration that uses up a lot of energy, with a small e. And if we can tune in to the higher vibration of the soul, that gives us a totally different energy, with a capital E. And then we may experience how fear is, as it were, the one end of an energy slide in our system. At the other end of this energy slide is freedom and love. And it is amazing, add love and anxiety diminishes. And the moving button on this energy slide is longing, yearning. Through longing for a higher life, we create soul space and soul energy around the ego cramp. Then our fears and uncertainties will lose their energy and their influence on us to a large extent, and will no longer dominate and rule us. And there is another tool to diminish our anxiety, worry, and fear. Don't attach any meaning to the situation. Take the importance of the occurrence. Nothing has any meaning unless we give it one. As such, we always create our own reality through the meaning we give it. What happens to us, or what we are concerned about, is simply a situation, a fact, a reality, something that happens. Remove the meaning, the importance, the story we give it, and all that is left is just a fact without a story. So, if you are able to, don't let the ego make a story out of it, and via the story influence you. The story of how our life should have been, how the others should have been in the past, and how it ought to be in the future. because the ego only fabricates, yes, even needs such self-composed stories to build up its own importance within our system. It needs it to continue to exist. Don't believe your thoughts. The liberating sequence actually is no meaning, no story. No story, no resistance. No resistance, no negative energy. No negative energy, no turbulence. No turbulence, but a deep soul resonance. And in such a deep soul resonance, the spiritually focused person experiences an intense yearning for another, changed, new life. As such, you might say the ego under it is oddly enough also a good sign, no matter how awkward, because apparently an opposite force helps us to move towards freedom. And the path from fear to freedom has 4 stages. 1. Our surrender to the soul within us. 2. Our unconditional acceptance of the unimportance of this horizontal world. 3. Our non-judgment about ourselves, about others, and about difficult situations. And 4. Our courage to step into the circle of our not knowing, in which the cosmic force is present. And then we make the step from thinking to consciousness, from ego to soul. And I looked my fear into the face, and she wasn't who I feared she was. It was only a puffed up form, covered with black and brown robes, but without substance. And she shriveled into the meager remains of not knowing and not being. And I placed these in the golden vessel in my heart and offered them up to the great cosmic energy that encompasses everything. And the great energy transformed the remains of not being and not knowing into wisdom and power. And fear was transformed into freedom. Thank you for listening.